Ladies and gents, this is the moment you've been waiting for. A podcast for podcasters. This is Creating the Greatest Show, and I'm your host, Casey Cheshire. Join me as we interview podcast hosts and investigate the ingredients of a successful interview podcast. We'll talk mistakes, earned skills, powerful questions, and more. This show is sponsored by Ringmaster, completely done for you B2B podcast production. All right, we are live. We are cranking. The show is started. The curtain has been pulled up and I'm ready to go. I can't wait to introduce you all to the guest today. He's an absolute badass. Well, who is he, Casey? Who is this guy? The suspense. And it won't be like the April Fool's prank that we just discussed, but we're going to hold that for April. But he's a serial entrepreneur, brand strategist, thought leader in the space. He's the guy you go to talk brand, and maybe we get him on the marketing podcast. That said, he's also an author and a podcaster, which is why we're going to talk to him and learn from him today. He's a mentor. He's a speaker. He is the host of Hitting the Mark. And the Hitting the Mark show is, I actually was listening to several this morning. Really interesting. And I also love the style of the show. We're going to talk a little bit more about that today. He's written 4 books. Most recently, the Brand Therapy book, number 2. Principal at Fabian, founder and CEO at Tone Optic, Fabian Geyrhalter. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the first time anyone mentioned my 4th book, which is just about out. So this is exciting. Hey, thanks for the intro. I appreciate it.
4 books. I mean, how do you do it? How do you?
You start writing and then you publish and then you keep going on with your life. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Man, I mean, I got 1 in there, but that was a lot of work. And it's almost like I need a couple of years of therapy to be ready to write the second one.
You sound like the person who starts their first podcast episode, right? And the first podcast episode is a big thing. You have to plan it and you think the whole world will listen and it's like so important. And then you're in episode 794, right? And you're like, hey, yeah, let's do that episode. It's the same thing with books. Once you've written one, you're like, okay, it's kind of like creating a sitemap, creating a structure, and then you do it and then you publish. Like you just it just starts flowing easier.
I like that. That's good advice. I already have that idea for number 2. So that's interesting.
Gotta finish number 1. That's it.
Yeah. One at a time, maybe. So, hey, you've been podcasting. You're basically at like 100 episodes or so. And I know you've recorded a bunch more that are in the hopper. There's a lot going on, and you've got a really successful show. So pull back the curtain for us on your show and share your most important strategy for a great interview podcast.
There are many most important ones. The one that I want to highlight is, I mean, I think you have to research your target, your subject, like as if you're a stalker, right? I mean, literally, you should come across as if you're a stalker, right? So, and they're really 3 reasons for that. And that doesn't mean that you have to spend a full day doing this. You just have to know the right resources, and we can go into that, right? And spend 2 hours on it, an hour, 2 hours, and really dive into it. In key reasons, right? The first one is if you follow them and if you study them and you see what their updates were, then you know what they've been up to recently. And usually everyone, right? You, Casey, me, if we ask, so hey, so what do you want to talk about? I want to talk about what's right now, right? Like, this is my latest release. This is my book. This is this, right? Like whatever is the latest, hottest thing, I talked at this conference, whatever. So that's what they want to talk about. And if you research that, they will already be amicable towards you, because they're like, not only do you know that, and you don't read the regular bio and that's it, and you do the regular standard questions, but you dive a little bit deeper. Second, if you spend time really researching, then you get to know the personality. And I think, so I don't do prep calls. Instead, I just research their personality and I know, okay, how do they like to talk? Are they more of the choker personality? Are they a very serious personality? How deep can I push them? And you just get that by listening to a past episode of themselves, right? Like always catch them on video, always see who they are, how do they behave. And then the third point that I would add to that kind of like stalker research approach is it opens it up for you to actually ask difficult questions. So if you study, for instance, if you go and this, of course, is different from one podcast to another, and it depends who you talk to and what you talk about. But for instance, I love going to their corporate and their personal Instagram channels. And I like to look at the last 10 posts and see like, oh my God, this is what they're really about. This is what the brand is about, the company is about, this is what they're about personally. And then go all the way down to the very first posts, like kind of like, that's where they came from. Wow. And of course, you're going to read the bio, you're going to do all your homework. But that to me, so Instagram and YouTube really going into seeing them in the flash, quote unquote, in the virtual flash, and seeing how do they behave, and then kind of like getting to know them a little bit on Instagram. That to me is really key. And even sometimes we all have been there, right? We have crazy busy weeks, and the podcast episode starts coming up, and you just don't have time to really prep too much. And you're like, you know what, I'm going to wing this somehow. I would do that. It's spend half an hour, 45 minutes on that, and you're already much better than if you just read the bio.
Yeah, talk to me about that. I mean, we did a prep call. You don't do prep calls, but you've talked about all this. Like you do this research, and you mentioned this several times. You said seeing them. It sounds like there's something about seeing someone on video, not just hearing them, but seeing how they interact.
Well, so what's interesting is what I do, and just for context for people listening, the people that I interview on my show, and I would say don't ask me how I get to this, but maybe you will. But the people that I have on my show, they're CEOs and founders of some really cool companies that everyone knows, right? Like the founder of Blue Airlines or Thrive Market, LegalZoom, et cetera, Rotten Tomatoes. So I actually don't have them on video. The way you and I talk right now, we actually can see each other, right?
Right.
I don't, but I want to see them on video prior, just on past interviews that they've done with the press or on podcasts, right, that have video, because I want to see how they actually look like and how they behave. But I realized very early on that if I invite really high stake kind of people, and they're going to be on their mobile phone on the way to the airport, or, they are not going to make me their priority. I just happen in their life. And even if the sound is horrible, I'm fine. Like, it's okay. We have an amazing person on it. So adding the video element would be an added, like barrier of entry. And that's why I'm not doing it. I would love to see them. And sometimes, like we chat for 10 minutes at the beginning offline, and just kind of like I give them more context. I make sure that they read some of the questions that I usually like to ask. And there's kind of like a 10-minute period, right, where we get to know each other a little bit. Sometimes we're on camera, sometimes we're not for that.
Got it. So you do have you still accomplish that prep work. You do your own research beforehand, and you have that little bit of warm up with that guest before hitting that record button.
Yeah, and just like most people that have a podcast show, they're extremely busy. I'm super busy, so I try to do everything in a really condensed manner, right? So by me researching them the night before, usually in my typical way, I get so much done so quickly, right? I mean, I can literally do this while I'm working out, right? Like I can do this while whatever I do, I can multitask that. And then instead of planning and rescheduling and figuring out with their PR agent, when is that perfect prep time, call, we just do 10 minutes in the beginning. They're all pros. They're constantly on like CNN and wherever, right? So for them, this is not a problem, right?
Yeah. This is easy for them. Yeah. Especially if they're not on video. There is something about you need to, have done your hair. Or,
look, this took hours, obviously, today, right?
Well, you, sir, have TV hair. So,
your hair, I
don't know why you don't do video. I'm made for radio, but like you're a video guy for sure.
Well, I'm flattered, but even, even for me having to be on video, it's the same thing that all of us have. Like, it's okay, it's like we gotta show up. We really gotta show up versus just kind of like, we can talk, and we can talk in plenty of places.
True. Do you feel like you lose anything when you do those interviews with people and you don't get the chance to see the nods or the expressions?
I mean, I think it would be a lie to say no. I think I'm doing well, and I like the way that things flow. And there's most probably in every second episode, there's most probably one time where we start cutting each other off or talking over each other for one split second. That would absolutely not happen if we would see each other, right? So but I've got an editor, he takes care of that, and it's fine, right? And I think that it allows me to have the right people on the show, and it's just one of those hurdles that I just overcome.
Yeah, it makes sense. And and from what I heard of the different episodes that I was listening to, you're actually really a funny guy, and so it's helpful that you do that talk at the beginning so people know that you're funny, and that you're not like if you're kind of tongue in cheek or something, they understand, oh, we're joking and this is fun. Because sometimes, I know with me, something you can miss the mark and it's like, I know, I'm kidding.
Well, my show is called Hitting the Mark, so I can't miss the mark. Remember?
No, you can't. That's true.
It's impossible.
You can't. No.
Right? But I mean, that said, it's like, well, I like to be conversational and I like to be friendly and personable and just have this be a regular chat, right? But it is a serious topic, and we talk about their brand and how they build it and what the problems were that occurred. And I do ask questions that I can guarantee you no one has asked them ever before, right? So I'm kind of like that fanboy at a concert of a group, and then afterwards they get to meet them and they ask a question and they're all like baffled of like, oh my God, no one asked me that. That's awkward, right? I'm trying to make it not awkward, right? But I do want to ask questions that are on everyone's mind, but they're too afraid to ask, right? So if a company has a really strange name and this is about branding, it would be awkward if I wouldn't ask them,
right,
what's up with the weird name, right? Or like how did you even survive with this name, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Rotten Tomatoes or whatever. Like I have to ask these questions because I think that's why people enjoy the podcast, right? That I'm not just doing A, the typical script, and B, only celebrating whoever's on the show of like, you're always the best, you're the best. And right, like I want to, we want to learn from mistakes.
Tell me about these questions that no one's asked before. It sounds like it's both important to you that you're not just repeating whatever was on CNN. And then how do you actually go and come up with those questions? Do you do it beforehand? Is it in the moment?
Well, I mean, I think that most podcast hosts, whatever their subject is, they're a subject matter expert in it, right? So you would assume, right? So, your show is about podcasting. You are a podcast expert, right? My show is...
Thank you.
Well,
come back anytime, sir.
Yeah. So my show is about branding, and I'm a brand strategist. I work with huge companies. It's what I do day in, day out, right? So for me, I just could not hear myself talk about branding, and be like, this is what it all is about. Like, I love to hear it from others and hear their side, and actually people who did it hands-on as founders versus like me coming in from the outside. And so I learn a tremendous amount from them, right? But because I'm actually interested, and also because I know how it's done, there are difficult questions, because sometimes I figure maybe they didn't think this quite through, or maybe there's some other things where I'm just like, wow, you guys just rocked it, right? But there's a layer of that when you're talking niche, it's easy to ask questions that are not on CNN, right? CNN wouldn't ask, what's the brand DNA of your company? They're like, what? It's like, right. It's like the audience would be like, well, what's going on now?
I can imagine the person messing up even reading that on the teleprompter. They're like, what am I saying? I don't even know what's going on. Yeah, so the niche, that's interesting. And then do you write them in advance?
So what I do is I write, yes. I usually have about 5 or 6 questions that are scripted. And that's really a nice cop-out for me. Those are the questions that I try to kind of like have in the backseat for every single podcast that I host. They're going to be there in the notes. People get them up front. They kind of can navigate through them. Some of them say, I don't even want to read them, and they don't even care. Some others are like, I studied them really well, right? Mainly because there's one question that my audience just is like waiting to hear the answer to. And I asked them what I just mentioned, what is the DNA of your brand? And that's really, if you can take your entire company that you created and you could put it through a funnel, and out comes one word. What is that word? And that's a huge philosophical question that you don't want to be asked on the spot, because it's going to, people are just going to think about it for 10 minutes and the audience is going to be bored. They're going to be on the spot. So that's even in my 5-10 minutes prep when we get the show started offline, I tell them, I want to make sure you saw that one question, right? Because I'm going to ask that. So
that's
so
good, because you're not setting them up to fail. Because you didn't even ask me that question. My brain starts thinking, it's like, oh God, but eventually it calms down and I've got a word. But yeah, is there something about not wanting to, what happens if you shake up your guests like that? Then lose some of that trust.
Usually they actually appreciate it, because it is an answer with which you can do a lot. So actually, if not like your mission statement and your purpose and all of it, but you literally, it's like your entire brand. What is it about in one word? And it's usually not the product, right? It's like an emotion. It's about empathy, or it's about collaboration, or it's about going against the grain, whatever it is, right? But once you know that, and this is going into brand strategy, it's pretty powerful for you as the founder to actually have derived that. So I hear it from a lot of those founders that I interview, maybe not these super high stake ones, but more like startup founders that I interview. They're like, this is really, I'm going to actually activate this within the company now. This is good stuff. I like that, right? Yeah. So
hell yeah, you're actually doing your coaching. You're acting as a strategist by just even being a podcast host and asking these tough questions. Do you ever get starstruck? You've talked to some really famous, important people. Do you get starstruck, or do you have any tips or any experiences dealing with just really important people?
All the time. And I think the minute that you don't, then you're phoning it in. It's kind of like those bands that you see, early in their career, and they're just overperforming, and they do like a set that's like, 4 hours, and they're part of the audience. And then at the end, it's like when they get older and they're just coming on stage, they're doing the same set every night. They don't interact with the audience. They're just kind of like, okay, 90 minutes, bye. Right? I don't want to ever be that guy. And if I am that guy, I better not do it anymore. And so I think a certain kind of nervousness in front, before you have, someone like, I don't know, Stacy of Stacy's Pita Chips, or like people that you use their products day in, day out, and, companies that have been bought up by Pepsi, and big people, right? In the industry, in the business industry, it's good that you're a little bit nervous, that you're not just taken for granted of like, yeah, I'm always chatting with them, right? I think it's just human nature that with a little bit, what do they say? Pressure makes diamonds, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really what it is. You have to have a little bit of that pressure.
It helps you keep that edge real, right? And it helps you keep strong to that.
Well, and if you don't do it, you're never going to grow, right? Like it's personally, right? With anything, right? If you're always afraid of that step of like, am I going to write the book? Am I going to get this guest? And we all have to overcome that, all of us, right? But I think it's one of those things where I can't ever ask that person to be on the podcast. Of course you can. Like, ask anyone. Like, you never know. It's like, it's just amazing how people love to talk about themselves, like I do right now. They do. And people love to give back. If this is not like, hey, come on my show and let's promote me, but if it's more about, let's talk about you to an audience, there's a chance,
Yeah.
They just do it.
Just do it. And they're real people, the regular people. Yep. Maybe they're not regular, but they are actually human.
They're still human.
Yeah, still human. Let's add in the idea of the difficult questions. So you've asked, really important founders of large companies about failures they've had, and is it prep? Like what is it that allows you yourself, even mentally, to be able to ask these questions? And then where do you get the courage to do that too, for some of those listening?
Sometimes I cop out during the show. It's funny. It's like sometimes I go to, because I create a certain script, right? So I've got my 5-8 questions that are standard ones. And that's usually when the interview partner answers very quickly, right? You ask them a question and usually you and I think, now they're going to go on a tangent and I have to stop them. But some of them just say like, 2 sentences. I'm like, okay, well, that was supposed to be 15 minutes, right? So I have to have a lot of backup questions that I kind of might not get to. But I usually have a pretty good script of questions and how one leads to another. So I kind of, the difficult questions, I set them up in a way where I feel like, well, now it would be natural. But, there are maybe 20% of times where when I talk to the person, I get intimidated because they're super harsh, quick, fast, like the business time. And we never have that rapport where we're like, like joking a little bit, or where I feel like there's the synergy. And if that's not there, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to suddenly say, what was the biggest failure your brand ever had? Because I'm sure it had one, right? It's like, oh, my brand is perfect. Let's keep going, right? Like it's those kind of people where sometimes
next question, Fabian.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Next.
Tell me about have you had some difficult interviews? Have you had, and what makes it difficult?
It wasn't, I think they're out of I think I'm like on 92, 93 episodes now. Out of the 90,
round that to 100,
Let's round it to 100. Out of those about 100 episodes, I feel like there are most probably 20% that I don't think are that great, right? Just because maybe the questions were too the answers were too scripted, they prepared too much, or maybe everything they said was so obvious and they didn't really give much. But then the strange thing is, then people say like, that's my favorite episode. So you never
blow your mind. Like
you're so close to it, right? So it's like the one that I thought, that was complete crap, and then people are like, I love that brand, and oh my God, this is so great. And I'm like, good, awesome. So, but there were technically difficult interviews. Horrifyingly difficult interviews, right? People who are on a cell phone at a loading dock where they just get like their new, things and this and that, and then we get cut off, and then their Zoom crashes, and then this, and there were episodes that were just really stressful from the point of view of like, how are we gonna get through this? And if it's a cool person on the other line, and usually they are, we kind of like crack jokes at it, or we have to. There were 2 times we had to reschedule because literally, like the universe was just, against us, and that might have even been on my side, right? Like that's like things happen, right, on everyone's side. So,
and tell me about those 2 reschedules. Did you get on and they had like terrible reception? It wasn't good audio, and then you called it at that point?
Yeah, or like one of them had a complete family emergency in the middle of it, right? Literally, there was like stuff falling down in their office, like there was like a bookshelf or something, and it is so suddenly like we literally we're like hi whatever, right? The person is like so excited to have you on the show, like let's get started. And that moment in the background is like, and I'm like, you okay? And like nothing, and then she's like, I think I have to reschedule. Sorry. And I'm like, is everyone alive? Is anyone hurt? And she's like, I don't know. I don't think so. And that was it. Like literally, we're off air. And so that's there's that kind of, and that's why I don't do my shows live, right? Like I do pre-record that. I do edit if there's ever like anything in this. But yeah, life happens, and especially with these founders, some of them are, they've got personalities, and they don't. You're at their mercy too. But life happens, right? People get sick, and things happen. So,
don't you kind of wish you had video of that?
I don't know if they wish. But people usually have a wall behind them, and the stuff happens around.
That's true. That's true. But the look on her face is like,
just crazy stuff. And and then there are the ADD founders that during the interview they're checking while they're talking, while they're answering questions, they're like checking the stock market of their company, and they're like, there's this stuff. There are these moments where you just feel like, we all know you're not with us, right? And that just happens with people that are super important, and you're just kind of like a small,
blip on the radar. Yeah, I totally get that. I kind of hate that a little bit, but if it is what it is.
It happens rarely. And even if it happens, I feel like I get so much out of that person, for my audience, that it's still a value add to have them on. So, and you don't know, you never know. You just really don't know. You don't know what I'm going to start talking about, right? Because we keep it leisurely, and we keep it open. And I think that's that's how great podcasts are. They're more like a conversation that is guided, right? And you want to get a couple of questions out of me for sure that your audience is expecting to, so that they get value out of it. But otherwise, they want to get to know me a little bit. They want to like kind of like hear, like some unexpected learnings for them as well as for me that I didn't think I would be talking about.
Right. No, I'm the same way. There's a flow. I like having some structure behind it. Like on my marketing podcast, I have milestones I hit, and in between I play, right? But there's certain things that happen. This one I've experimented. That first question hits. Typically the last question is like a nice closer, but everything else is like, well, maybe it will happen. Maybe
now I want to go straight to the last question. I'm like, what will it be?
Right. I know. You'll have to wait. But isn't there a little bit of that pressure? Do you feel the pressure to have the next question ready, or to keep it going, keep it flowing, and not necessarily have a drop in the action?
Yeah, and I mean, you do, but I feel that's why I have a little bit of my framework, right? If I have my 10, 12 questions and I know one flows to the other, if the person says something super interesting and I want to dig deeper, or if it allows, and I literally have this Word document up next to me, and then, which is another reason, which is fantastic not to be on video, right? Because I can actually stare at the Word document and move things around as I go. I move questions around, right? I realize I'm like, okay, so she's not going to be great at this question. I'm going to get rid of this, but I really want to go to this one next. And so I'm constantly copying, pasting while I'm actually talking to them, so that when I go off in a tangent, suddenly we arrive at something that I want to talk about later, and I need to touch on that right now. So it's a lot of that shuffling going on.
Wow. So it sounds like you're really tell me about mapping it out. I know you probably never even thought of this, or articulated it verbally, but what kind of pattern are you looking to establish, or what kind of flow? Or
I mean, it's, in the beginning, it starts very easy of like, hey, how did you create this brand? Like,
Sure.
Tell us a little bit how you got there. And that's the typical founder story. They've told it 50,000 times, right? So that's easy on them. It's easy on me. It's good for the listeners. I don't have to do a big intro about their entire life. It's coming up, right? And then I usually like go, go big picture brand talk, and then I go deeper, right? And that's kind of like how it works, right? And then it gets more specific about certain parts of their brand that I want to touch on. And then in the end, I open it, and then at the end, it goes to this really big question, that brand DNA question, which kind of sums up the entire conversation of like, if you can take all of this and say it in one word, what would it be? And then it's more about, let's give back to the community. What are some tips that you have for them? And then that to me rolls really well into how can they get in touch with you? Right? Like, where can they find
tips into getting in touch?
Right. So there's this kind of like framework. And I believe that my audience also enjoys having a little bit of that rhythm that they know to expect. But inside of that, in between the lines, right, the white space, I believe, is where the magic lies, right? I believe in graphic design, the white space is where the magic lies. In music, the white space, like that openness, like they're the genius moments. And so I really think that's, and some shows, I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe she just said that on air. Like, like amazing things that I'm sure some of the founders never ever talked about. And that to me is really, really fulfilling and exciting.
And that brings up something else I wanted to ask you about, was the idea. There's some fulfillment here. What do you get out of podcasting? I know there's business reasons and there's corporate reasons, but like, you as a person, what does that feel for you?
I feel like there are three ways I can sum it up. It's credibility, it's community, and it's access. And so between these three, the credibility part is literally what I get out of it for my own professional brand, right? Like, here's a brand guy who talks with the founder of a Fortune 500 company about their brand. Yeah. Well, he must be legit. He's playing with the big guns. He's like, right. And even though I have never worked with them, the association automatically gets me to that status, which is very strategic, right? So that's the credibility. The second part, community, and this might be interesting to some of your listeners who are working on a podcast. very early on, actually from the very first show on, I realized that I don't want to have advertising on my show. Like, I want my show to be 100% sponsor free. I just couldn't do it. And I also don't have the time to deal with what message and then getting a new one and they pay a couple bucks and then it's annoying. And it's like this whole thing, right? It's just too much. And so what I decided to do instead is to do a Patreon where people can join a Patreon group. They pay $50 a month, which is pretty significant. They pay or they can pay $5 a month just to keep the show advertising free, right? Or they pay $50 a month and they become part of my community. And so it's pretty neat because at this point, it's a community of anywhere between 12 and 20 people. So they basically pay like 12, 15K a year, which I feel is kind of making up for the advertising or at least some of it. But I'm mentoring them on branding, on brand strategy, and all of that. So what that then does is not only do I feel like I give back to the community, right? Because this is not my hourly rate, right? I give back to the community. They give back to the show that it's sponsor free, and they love that. And so they're super fans. And these like 20 people really turn into my biggest fans, right? When the new books out and stuff, like it's kind of like a small group that is mutual fans. So that's the community. And then last but not least, access. I mean, I get access to amazing people, right? So when I release my new book, I'm emailing some of them saying, hey, like, I would love to have a quote of yours on the cover of my book saying how amazing my book is. Can I send you a copy of my book? Would you be open to that? And I mean, having a quote from these people on my book, again, it helps my own personal brand tremendously. So I think it's like community, access, and credibility, really, those three.
That's amazing. And the fact that you even have that answer, those three at the ready, I think that's a tribute to, thinking in advance about how you're going to answer. Cause you sound so clear when you have an answer like that. Whereas I can imagine myself sort of muddling through and, I get this out of it and this out of it. That was such a
well, I mean, what's exciting about this show is that I'm on so many podcasts and all I talk about is the same thing, right? This one here, I'm actually talking about something very different. So before this show, I actually had to have some alone time with my podcast. And I'm like, what is it for me? Like, why do I do it? Because I knew you're going to ask, why do you do this show? What's difficult? What's great, right? Like, I mean, those are questions that I would assume you would ask, and so it made sense for me to actually look a little bit inside. And it was actually nice, just like some people that I have on my show, where afterwards they walk away and they actually benefited from it, from answering, kind of like therapy, right? Like they answered, and because of that, they learned. So for me, like that idea of credibility, access and community, I would have not thought that much about it before the show, but now I had to think about, like, what do I get out of it? It's like, there's actually a lot I get out of it. Because every time you have a podcast coming up, you're like, oh, here it goes again. I need to do the whole thing. It's like, and I have so much going on. But there is a huge value to it.
And I appreciate that you thought about that too. And I do find it kind of fun because I also have that other show where it's in the industry and I'm doing the thing and I hear a lot of the same thing. But with this show, it's a little bit of a holiday or a break from the industry shows to just think about our thinking on a particular topic. So I really appreciate that. I don't know if this opens up Pandora's box. It probably does, but let's do it. And I didn't prepare you for this, but talk to me about, I know you're a pro, so you can handle it. Talk to me about brand and podcasting. Have you given that much thought? Do people ever bring that up in conversations with you and your consulting?
I mean, look, as far as like how being on a podcast or running a podcast can benefit a brand. Yeah. I mean, look, from a personal brand, I think, as far as being the podcast host, I just checked this off, right? Like there are a lot of reasons why you want to be a podcast host, and that trickles down to the company that's behind you, right? So I'm a brand strategist. Behind me is Fabian, that's my brand consultancy. So that slowly kind of like trickles down to that. and for a guest, it's basically it's suddenly having access, to hundreds and thousands of people that now know about the brand, and they suddenly say, oh, I actually like that person behind that ice cream or behind those chips or behind whatever it is, right? Like, oh my God, I get to meet that person. It's exciting, right? So it's really, it's a win-win for the two guests. As far as the brand behind them, it's for my particular show, it's very specific, right? Because I feel like the founder actually learns a little bit about him or herself, and that can be brought into the brand. They start realizing what are they doing well, what are they not doing well, and it's just like for them more of that self-realization that's directly going to affect the brand that they're running, right? Now, if it's a regular podcast, right, where it's like a smaller services firm or a B2B firm, and the founder is constantly going on podcasts, how much does that really benefit the company behind the person on the podcast? It's thought leadership, it's insights, it's credibility, right? It always is. And I think that podcasts to me are not something, they're a long sales cycle. This is not something where you're going to be on a couple of shows and you're going to start seeing ROI for the company, right? But over time, it is just unbelievable, even for SEO, right? So if people put in the company name and then suddenly they're like 5 YouTube videos of someone from the company talking about being the expert in that subject matter that the company represents, it's like, oh, wow. So obviously these people know what they're doing. Let's go, right? Like it's this decision-making, process that is cut so much shorter. Right. It's the same thing with writing a book. If people, like now, if people come to my website and they can just check off these boxes. That doesn't make them hire me, but that just makes the path to hiring me so much shorter, because they're like, oh my God, check. Now let's just make sure that he's in budget and that he has time and like, like that he can actually do it. And so, but it definitely helps, and that's just all part of creating more credibility around either your personal brand or the brand that you're representing,
right? Because the people buy from people they trust, right? And so there's something about the interview.
So branding is all about, right? Trust. That's it.
Branding is trust. Interesting.
That's it.
That's cool. ... Wait till you guys hear Fabian and I chat on the Hardcore Marketing Show, where we will do nothing but talk about brand. Which will be a lot of fun. And I'll have to work harder though to get you off of your scripted answers, right? Because
I know. Well, even though I don't like to have scripted out, so people ask me, hey, what does branding mean to you, right? On every show. And I really try to not say the same thing over and over. So here now I said trust is branding, right? But it's like I always try to say something where
a different answer every time.
Yeah, I start thinking about it like in different angles, also to challenge myself not to become that one trick pony, which is hard, but I'm trying real hard to do that.
So I totally understand that. Man, so many things to ask you about. So many questions, so little time, sir. Well, what is everything's flowers and happiness and rainbows podcasting? But let's say there's a challenge or two. What would you say? What are the challenges that you have right now with podcasting?
Look, I have to say, once you're in episode 100, things are running pretty smoothly, right? And you wouldn't get that far if you constantly feel like there are challenges or you need to change things. I guess by now it's such a well-oiled machine that it's like, am I boring myself? Am I boring others? Like, once you get to 100, what happens then? Do you keep going with the same format? Do you change something up? Or like, is it a good thing, and why change a good thing, right? So for me, it's a little bit of these thoughts as we come up to episode 100. Like it's a mile marker. What happens after that? Should something change? Should something not change? And to be completely honest, which I hope I am the entire time, is, my biggest challenge is really the setup from a technical point of view. So I've got a great setup. I spent money on it, but people work from home these days, right? Like, and some of them have the luxury to continue this journey, and that's where I'm at, right? So the idea of you only have 4 walls, and there are helicopters that can come by, there are gardeners from next door that can come by, and you can only soundproof a place that much unless you really make it look like a sound station, right? And so to me, that for the last 100 episodes has always been something that made me more nervous than it should have, right? Because I'm constantly weary of like what's going on. Will the sound interfere? And so now I'm actually building a full-on like studio.
Are you?
Yeah, like we purchased a new home and we have a space outside that I can basically like recreate from scratch, and I can make sure that it has like more soundproofing in it, because I talk a lot, right? If I don't mentor people, I just constantly advise people, and I don't want something to come up. But to me, that is really the biggest challenge, and I'm going to overcome that in the next couple of months. So
the technical side, the soundproofing and the outside noises and that kind of thing. And you're right. You get to 100, you've got things, knock on wood, but well in hand. You've got to fit. You've gone through your bumps to this point, which is why I like to, for this show, interview, successes like yourself who have survived. What is it like? Most people don't get past 15 episodes, or
oh really?
10. There's like a number. Yeah, it's like a great chasm. It's a great filter, if you will, and people can't get through that. They stop before then. So to keep going this long,
well, in Casey, I mean, this brings up a good point that I think is well worth sharing. If you start a podcast, you better enjoy not only the format, but the people that you bring on and the questions that they answer and the answers that they give you that help you, professionally or personally. So meaning if you do this for a B2B company, right, everything's a little bit boring, everything's B2B, you feel like, okay, and you just have to do the podcast because like, that's what the marketing people told you. And so you just have to get the certain people that people tell you to get. And then in the end, you ask the same 10 scripted questions. You always feel like you're on the spot. You don't really chive, and you do this for 15 episodes. Stop now, right? Like find a way to make it feel more like you're having a beer, right? Fabian and Casey are having a beer together, they're hanging out, and they're talking about something that they actually find interesting because they're doing it, right? And it's that thing where maybe you have to change the script, maybe you have to change the idea of the show to become something that, and there are a lot of introverts that end up being podcast hosts because they are that job function in a company where it's like, oh, you got to do that, right? And I don't even think there's anything wrong with that, because even a lot of founders are introverts and they have to do interviews, right? But you just have to set the stage in a way where you feel like, I enjoy it. I get something out of it, right? And even if you're shy and if you're camera shy and if you hate talking and, in front of people, and if you're, all of that, then at least have questions where you feel like those answers are just going to really benefit your company and you, and are just going to, you get giddy about getting those answers, right? So but you have to find that, you have to find the excitement in what you do. I mean, with everything, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like otherwise you won't survive. It's just too much.
I mean, you will, but then it's like the 9 to 5, right? Like you're going in with your head down and it's neon lights around you, office setting, you go down with your head down. And then that's not it. Like, right? Yeah, right. Podcasting should stimulate minds and get people excited.
Because it's such an opportunity. So it's like, why waste it? And if you hate it and you're better off being a commercial fisherman, go do that.
That sounds like fun for a day.
Yeah, unless it's like Alaskan crab fisherman, in which case.
Oh yeah,
I don't know about that.
Well, look for a day, and I even totally. This has nothing to do with podcasting, but I always feel like, wouldn't it be great if you have 365 days, and every day you would have a different job just for a year, and you get thrown into like cleaning the gutters, and the next day like you have to work with a chef in a 5-star restaurant, and the next day you're like, but literally every day you're kind of like an apprentice to. I feel like life would be so interesting. I mean, of course, craziness, but and filming the whole thing, that would be even sensational.
How much would you pay to do that, or as a service, or are you saying it's a show and you turn that into?
I don't even know. I don't even know if people got to pay me to do it, or if I got to pay them to be able to do it, right? But I think it's such a life, like. You would never look at a cleaning person the same way, or at the person that's like doing the yard work or doing whatever, or right, like everything. Yeah. Once you see, a bottle from the inside, right, like it's always different, or how the sausage is being made, or whatever analogy, metaphor, But I don't know. I'm just fascinated by that idea that we all kind of like find our calling. and we stick with it, right? Like I'm the brand guy, you're the marketing. Like we do our thing, right? And we're like, great, we're successful, we make money and we enjoy it, some halfway, some really, a lot. And we kind of keep doing this, but man, are we completely missing out on like what the world, like what other people do? So I don't know. I mean, maybe that's something at some point that I'm going to look at in one way or the other.
It's a cool exploration, especially if it's like you have to do them all. Some will be glorious and glamorous. Some won't be.
Or the majority is going to be, crab fishing in Alaska. But I mean, even that, like the life lesson. That
hell of a story too, right?
One day would teach you. One day.
This is a show. We should pitch this to Netflix.
Seriously, like that's what that is, right? Like having one charismatic person do that, not me, not you, but someone who's like younger and like can do all that stuff and feel, and it would be hilarious. But now that this is live,
you got the hair for it, man. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I still have it, right?
Still
like for how long? Hey, whoever steals this idea from us on this show, they better give us a little bit of a kickback here.
Yeah, give us a little.
I just want to say a little bit of loving, a little TLC. Come on, people.
TLC. Are you going to do anything for 100? Anything special for episode 100? It's coming up.
Oh boy. Oh man. I wish you wouldn't ask this question. Okay, so here is the thing. Okay, the thing is the following. I had an idea about a year ago for a hardware startup, and I was silly enough to follow my dream. I spent like over $50,000 doing this. It's a startup, which means it's likely to fail, and I am just scrambling making this work next to my day job, right? Yeah. And I always for like the last year, I said episode 100. I'm going to have someone else interview me about that startup's huge success, right? Which I'm still waiting. I'm like, okay, we're close, right? About that huge success. And then I'm on the flip side and they're going to ask me all the exact same script that I usually ask. And I thought it would be fun for people to suddenly hear me in that passenger seat answering that. But in order for that to happen, I need that startup to be somewhat successful. But hey, we're on Kickstarter for another couple of days, and it's called Tone Optic. Anyone can look it up. And yeah, so we'll see. But it's an exciting ride, that's for sure.
I've definitely done that, and it's a hell of a lot of fun. And honestly, as you know this, as the host, you're asking questions. You're not really, you're the guide, but you're not getting a chance to necessarily preach, about the things that you want to, and that's where you go on other people's shows to do that. So it does give you a chance for your audience to finally hear, you speaking about that topic. And usually it's about, so my friend interviewed me about, and I talked about my book and I talked about all the different things that are happening. So it was a pretty cool thing. So yeah,
you've done that. You flipped the.
I have. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm 90% sure I'm gonna do that. Unless it goes so up in flames that I never want to say the word again. But I somehow, highly knock on wood here, doubt that.
Is that because it has to be like a success? All the people you're talking to are successes, or?
Yeah. It's like the questions are, what was your biggest brand fail? And I'm like, everything so far? No,
everything's on fire, and I'm like,
but it's different, right? Because these people they launch successfully. They're some of them are household name, their product, so some of them are such a hot startup that people love them, right? And for me, I'm such a niche product, and I'm slowly kind of like pushing it. But look, that being said, I've been chatting with the guy of Slipknot, and I've been chatting with like those, and like all these people that suddenly love that product. So that was 3 days ago. So I think that these things are slowly happening, and I start seeing that wave coming enough that even if I'm not selling a huge amount, there's some traction that I can talk about. And it's, I am writing a book about this, right? And I started writing that book from pretty much day one of like, okay, how does it actually feel starting a company in the hardware space when you have no idea what the hell you're doing? And so it's pretty hilarious because it is pain and fear and tears and a little bit of joy and glory, but mainly it is just really, really hard. And so I thought that would be fun to write about. So that's going to be upcoming at some point.
Yeah, another book. But I would encourage you to do that, man, because even just hearing you say it, and I haven't listened to all of your episodes, but I bet your listeners would love to hear.
I'm going to do it. Even if it's about failure and even if it's whatever it is, right? Like, I will definitely. You put me over the edge. I will. Those 10% that I wasn't sure about, I will do it.
Oh, that's all. It'll be a great 100. It'll be really special that way.
It will be definitely very different. Yeah.
It'll be good. You'll be super critical of it, but it'll be fantastic. And people will do that thing like we talked about. That was my favorite episode. And you're like, really? That was your favorite?
Yeah.
Totally. Well, here's a question for you. We chat again 50 episodes from now. What do you want your podcast to look like? Is it changing much? Is it staying the same? Anything vision for the future?
Well, look, we talked a little bit about that 100 mark and what should change, right? And I'm this is a premature question because I'm not quite sure yet. Should it or should it not, right? To a certain extent, I feel within my small community of marketers and brand people and entrepreneurs, and like they're interested to hear how did people get it right? Like what did they do that I can learn from it? So I kind of feel like I either I'm going to stop it completely after 100 and that's it. But I doubt it because I'm someone who just, it's habits, right? And the older you get habits, you kind of stick to them. Some
access, the community, all the things.
There you go. So more likely than not, it's just going to keep flowing the way it does right now. I always want to get it to be shorter, right? Usually mine is about this length of yours. It's about 40, 45 minutes. I would love for it to be more like 25, 30 so that people on actual commutes can quickly get that insight. Maybe I start cutting it down more and doing that. Maybe not. We'll see. You got to listen to it. That's the only way you're going to find out what changes.
That's right. And how do people listen to it? Maybe you can share with us links of how people can connect with you, the podcast, all that.
Absolutely. I mean, hittingthemarkpodcast.com. That's where all the glory happens. But I mean, you can find Hitting the Mark, the podcast everywhere, right? Wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find me personally on LinkedIn with this really complicated name, but you can see it wherever you see this.
Link right to it in the show notes. So it's
you can absolutely connect with me on LinkedIn, and otherwise you can go to Finian.com, FINIEN.com. That is my consultancy, and from there on it links to all the different social spheres.
Boom. Beautiful. I love it. I hope people all do exactly that and click through and click and check you out and connect and listen. Thank you so much for being on here. It's kind of been a whirlwind, and I feel like I could probably talk to you for 2 hours. Maybe, while you shrink your podcast, I'm going to add an extra half an hour to this thing.
Well, and that's why you have another podcast, and maybe we keep the conversation going there. But
let's do that.
Thank you so much for having me, because this was a real, as I said before, I keep talking about the same kind of subject and now talking about the podcast. This was a first for me. So it was really nice actually to reflect upon, like what I created there. So it was great. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you did a smash up job of it too. It was fantastic. I learned a lot from you. And for those listening, if you have learned a lot, and I freaking know you have, because I literally have 2 pages of notes over here, then share this with someone else. Be a thought leader. That's thought leadership, just sharing good information to people that need it. So get this information out there, share the episode, share the link, all that good jazz. Reach out to Fabian. And with that, thank you, sir. This has been a blast. I can't wait to talk to you on the next one.
Perfect. Great pleasure.
All right, everyone. This has been another crazy cool episode of Creating the Greatest Show. We will see you all next time. And next time doesn't have to be next week. Life's too short, and we have way too much to talk about. Find show notes full of takeaways, lessons, and links at creatingthegreatestshow.com. For more information on launching your own podcast or working with us to produce your existing show, come on down to the big tent at ringmaster.com. Until then, friends, whatever you do, do it with all your might. Work at it, if necessary, early and late, in season and out of season, not leaving a stone unturned and never deferring for a single hour that which can be done just as well now. P.T. Barnum.